just go ahead and get into the slide deck here. Yeah, like Joe said, my name is John Ayler, Decision Resources, and we're going to be taking a look at Integral Enterprise Viewer. And the agenda today is really pretty simple. What we're going to do is take a look at IEV, what it is, and what it means by Enterprise Data Access, some of the design goals that we've had with IEV, and why IEV is used as a platform in many cases. So we're going to look at some of those use cases and talk about some of the differentiators between IEV and other somewhat like products like reporting solutions and that kind of thing. And then we're going to get into a demo and spend most of the time there and then do a Q&A session at the end.
Hey, John.
Yes.
While you mentioned Q&A, I just wanted to mention real quick to everybody, if you have a question along the way, please go ahead and pop that into the chat. And then what we're going to do is at the end of John's demo, I'm going to go ahead and read those questions off that we get, and he'll address those then. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Joe. So what is IEV? It's Enterprise Data Access, like I mentioned. And what that basically means is that we want to take data from all different parts of the enterprise or your company and be able to put them into one product that we can use to use that to make queries, reports, and dashboards, whether it's coming directly from Sightline or if it's a third-party database or even a flat file data store and that sort of thing. We can bring that seamlessly into IEV. Maybe it's a third-party CRM application or something like that. Anything that's loosely coupled can be brought into IEV, and you can make reports and dashboards and that kind of thing with it. So some of the design goals that we've had with IEV is to provide loose integration with Sightline. We did that by making it a standalone app, which means that it's pretty impervious to Sightline upgrades. So if you're going from Sightline 8 and you're using IEV and you make a lot of views and so forth that you're using every day, going to Sightline 9 is not going to be a big deal because it doesn't exist within Sightline. It actually stands alone and talks directly to the Sightline database. And it's much more performant that way as well. But we can also incorporate other data sources. We're not limited to the Sightline IDOs and so forth that come from, how they design that software. It has multi-tier functionality. Another design goal that we had was to make it so that users had a lot of functionality. And when I say users, I mean, the people that don't have a lot of technical know-how but want to use this as a reporting tool, as a dashboarding tool, and that sort of thing. They can use that. They can use the product easily without having to learn where that data is coming from, without having to have the access of directly accessing a database. But of course, we need to do that as well, so we've split that off into a different group of power users or developers. And this kind of illustrates that point. So on the one hand, in the first top left quadrant there, we have IT staff, and that's another way of saying, people with the real technical know-how of how to access a database and where that data is coming from and that sort of thing. They go in and define queries using a real powerful, GUI query editor. And they can also bring in stored procedures and other things that would normally take a lot of programming that don't take programming in IEV. And they can access and combine all those data sources and assign permissions as well. And those can be the same people or different people, the ones that assign permissions and the ones that are actually defining the queries. From there, that data becomes available in the client where end users that don't have a lot of technical knowledge, don't have a whole lot of time for in-depth training and that sort of thing, can create reports. They can automate emailing of those reports very easily. They can create their own KPIs and dashboards, and they can even, if they have access to do so, they can even publish those dashboards to the web portal. So the website comes into play at that point, and website visitors will be able to interact with those dashboards that they published immediately without programming. And all the major web browsers are supported there. I'd like to also say something that's not in this slide is that we are mobile enabled as well, so we have a lot of customers that are using those IEV views and dashboards to view on their mobile devices. And then finally, if you do use SharePoint, just as another way to integrate those web views, we can also, you can also easily put those into SharePoint as well. So if you just have SharePoint users, then they can come in and consume that data as well very easily. So IEV is a platform, There's many different potential uses for IEV, and that's what kind of makes it hard to explain sometimes what it does and that sort of thing. You know, it can't be customized or it can't be classified as just a report writing tool and that sort of thing, because there's a lot of different things you can do with it. So that's why we kind of think of it as a platform that you can do many different things with it. One of the uses that we have done and help customers do, or they've done on their own, is to create custom web portals that you can easily modify. And for an example of that, we actually have content that allows you to create a service repair portal. So if you're in the service industry, you can you have your users come in, create RMAs, which actually get created as SROs in Sightline, and then they can ship those pieces back by putting a label right there and inserting a packing slip, and they get automatic email notifications based on when that item's repaired or if it's unrepairable and so forth, and when it ships back out of the plant for return for them. So that's something that's an entire web portal application that was built on the IEV platform. Of course, you can also do ad hoc reporting and dashboarding. You can also schedule those reports easily, and like I mentioned, there's mobile device interaction as well. So what IEV does for you is make a lot of programming tasks, already there for you, so you don't have to go and reprogram those things. So if you're using it as a web platform, or even internally using IEV's own client, it makes it a lot easier to do that type of stuff without having to have, programming skills in place for that. So it's a web browser agnostic view. It has grids, graphs, gauges, form type views, etc. It handles user authentication, user registration, and the grouping of those users into different hierarchies, so you can give company A access to only their data, and they will see only their data, and you can add other users to company A at a point in the future. It's a very powerful query engine. It's themable. It actually uses Theme Roller, which is a jQuery extension that allows you to select any of the predefined themes that are in our product, but also roll your own if you want to make it look exactly like your main website. And it's very low entry cost. So the basic tagline that we have for IEV, and we've tried to come up with some of these because it's kind of hard, is to write a query once and be able to use it anywhere, whether it's in a web portal, an internal data view that the end users can customize, or a scheduled executive report. So some of the differentiators that we have with IEV is that it does have that multi-tier functionality, and that cuts down on training costs because we only need to train for what the users will be doing. A web portal user doesn't have to learn the entire application and how the query editor works. So those are in separate forms, separate screens, and actually separate standalone applications. So it's low complexity for those who don't need that complexity. It's also secure in that way because we're not relying on database permissions, which can be tricky to set up and that sort of thing. And sometimes there are none, if it's a flat file data store. But we can give users access to that data without giving them any access directly to that data. So there's no web programming needed if you're using the web as a portal. There's a one-time web server setup, and of course you want to have that, secured and so forth like you would any other web server. But then it's very easy and secure to publish additional content to the web. And you don't have to wait for an official update. So if you're waiting for, a portal update, say, from Sightline on your favorite Sightline customer portal, obviously that can go through a lot of, versioning and that sort of thing. You don't have to wait for that. You can use IEV as a way to kind of fill in the gaps between those official releases. So with that, I want to go ahead and get into a demo. And let me minimize this here. And what I'm going to do is show you from the back to the front, kind of like that slide I showed you earlier about the different roles, how you would go about developing queries in IEV and how to consume those in the different clients. So first we're going to start off with the developer tool here. When you first load IEV, there's a big library of inquiries already in place, And we call them inquiries because it's a collection of views and links and parameters and some other things. So you can make use of those, or you could, or modify them, or copy them and modify them, and that sort of thing. Or you can just make your own from scratch. So, for example, here under customer, I have customers, customer orders, order items, shipments, all those types of things, RMAs, and we have a number of inquiries underneath each one of these different groups. Now, again, I can add my own groups. I can, call these whatever I want and that sort of thing as well. So let's just take a simple one and go into customers. What the customer inquiry does is, and first, I'll talk about the query and then go into some of these other properties here, is just give us a view of customers joining the customer and customer address table together. So as you can see, if I expand out Sightline in the query editor, I'll see all the objects that make up our Sightline database. And then we can add those easily to the join, and then we can easily add fields to that. These are the low-level things that a power user or somebody in your company who's on the IT staff and that sort of thing would typically do in order to set these things up. And hopefully I'm not having database connection problems here in my demo image. One thing of note here as well is that Sightline is actually an alias that points to a specific database at this point, which is great because that actually allows us to have a level of abstraction so that if I do look at other sites, I can just copy this inquiry into that site if I want, or just with a few clicks actually make it a multi-site report or inquiry, which is very handy when there's not one available in Sightline. So as you can see, I can see all the tables, of course, in the database. I can also see all the views, any user functions that return table values, and also any stored procedures that come out of Sightline, which is particularly helpful when you go down to the report stored procedures, because all the report logic that Sightline uses to build its reports are available for you to consume at a data level in IEV. And it's as easy as just copying that over and adding it to the query editor here. Now the benefit of that is that you can take a report store procedure and without modifying it all, you can bring in other tables or other stored procedures or views and extend those report stored procedures without changing any source code. So you're still compliant, with source code modification licenses and that sort of thing. But you can extend them as well and serve them up in IEV. So I can do a preview here of the data that I want to look at. I can also get a query plan at any time, and this is available both in the query editor and in the client to see exactly what IEV is doing to retrieve that data and all the steps that it has to go through. This is a pretty easy one. It's just a SQL query, but when you're combining store procedures and other things, it'll be fairly complex as it moves that data into a temporary table and joins it for you automatically and all that. But if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, you can do that here. Finally, I can edit any field property and add functions to those fields, so it's easy to roll up data. I simply put a function like sum in a numerical field and remove the fields that I don't want to have in that group, and it'll group by the data that I'm doing the function on automatically. I also, as a developer, have the ability to add parameters. So this is what the end user can filter on from a query mode. And what I mean by that is that they can filter all the records returned from the database by these different parameters. And we can set them up any way we like. Got a bit of a screen delay here. Well, we can set them up any way we like so that we can, for example, have ranges such as greater than or equal to. We can put in a like operator or not like so that we can do wildcard character searches through the data. Not like is obviously the opposite of like, but it's a real handy way to put in not like null, so you can filter out null records and that sort of thing. There's different padding rules so that if if Sightline write justifies something, such as a customer number. IEV will make that transparent to you just by setting up a rule on that parameter so that you can see, just by typing in customer 7, you'll see customer 7 instead of space, 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 space 7. You can also base the settings, which is what they can select in the parameters, based on a query or even a script, which is very powerful because you can return something like today's date as a default for that parameter, or today's date minus 30 days, and that sort of thing to facilitate date range type parameters. But they do have the capability of filtering on screen as well in the grid that they're looking at if you do have a grid view. So they're not limited by these parameters, but again, this is what goes and actually queries the database, and it's more than just one page of records that they're dealing with when they use this as a filter. And I'll show you this here in a second in the clients. Linking is the ability to link different inquiries together. So for example, if from customers, I made a link to go to the orders inquiry, which is very convenient because that way I can just right-click on a customer and see all the orders associated with that customer. And then when I go to orders, I'll be able to right-click and see all the order items for that customer or for that order, and so on and so forth. I can also make those links somewhat permanent on screen so that I can click around and see, exactly what is related to that master record that I clicked on initially. So from the orders inquiry, you can see we have links going back to customer, viewing the notes for the order item, going to order items, looking at shipments, and that sort of thing. And finally, we have scripting, which is a very powerful way to launch third-party applications or actually update information back into Sightline, because even though IEV is a read-only tool by default, you can actually script out some database edits and that sort of thing, which is really nice because we can run those in the context of the web client as well. They'll execute on the server securely, and you'll be able to do things like, for example, we have a mobility client user who is looking at sales leads on their mobile devices, and as they click down in the mobile view in IEV, they're able to launch a script to go and approve that sales lead. So that empowers their sales force out in the field. So that's a really quick overview of the developer client. I want to go over to the rich client now, what we call the rich client, because it's not the web client, even though the web client's very rich as well, and show you what typical end users would see now that I have this set up, from a developer perspective. So an end user would typically navigate this tree in the top, just like they do in the developer tool. And for each one of these inquiries, they now have views listed under each one instead of a collection of properties. There we go. All right, so for the customer's view, I can just press run, and it's going to retrieve a list of customers. So this is just based on my default query that I set up. And as you can see, it defaults to a grid type view. I can do different things in here, such as take out customer number 1 or 3, apply that filter for this page. I can do things like sort by any column. I can, just do different things that you normally could with a grid type view. I can also go in and specify a parameter on the parameters window in order to go requery the database and refresh only with that data from the database. So if I do put in customer 1 and press requery, then I only see customer 1 is returned from the database. I can also go to view design. If I don't like how it's displayed as a grid, I can, first of all, as an end user, just go ahead and remove columns that I don't want to see. I can either mark them as invisible or just delete them, depending on what you need to do. And I can rename these to whatever I want. And I can move these around wherever I want and that sort of thing. I can also tell it to auto data get, so it pulls that up right away, or show parameters right before it queries every time. I can also add whatever calculations I want to here as much as I want, and do other modifications as well. So all those customizations, including my selection criteria, can be saved with my view. And normally I can't edit the default view. I'm logged in as an admin, so I can do that. But as an end user, I can create as many views as I like and name them whatever I like, and that allows me to go back into them later and base reports off them easily and that sort of thing. I can also show this as a form type view, which just lists one record per screen. I can go in and show it as a graph. So any, if there is some kind of numerical data that I want to graph, I can easily just go and add that. I add the data points here, I customize how it looks, and I have a number of options as far as what type of graph to display and how it's displayed and so forth. I can also display it as a gauge, so that gives us a linear or radial gauge to display information. And I can also describe 3 different ranges, up to 3 different ranges of colorization that happens, so we know when we're in the red or we know we're in the green or whatever colors that you want to display in the gauge. I could even do a tree view, which is good for hierarchical data, which allows us to do things like display a bill of material structure where the top level is an item that you select, and then it goes through and expands all the items underneath it. It allows me to collapse nodes and expand them and that sort of thing, and just see that in a tree type of view. I can also specify color rules, which makes data stand out. So, for example, if I want to see, okay, I want to show all the customers that have a credit limit, and I want to make that scope highlight the entire row, and I want to say if their credit limit is over, I don't know, 10,000 or something like that, which is probably not a great example. I want to show that in blue with white text. So I can save that color rule off, and then immediately that's going to display in the view whenever I query the data. So there we see the first row is colorized blue. If I take the filter off that I had before, obviously we'll see more of that. And I can take out that alternating row highlight to make it a little clearer and that sort of thing. And of course I can format this number to make it look better. I can do all kinds of things with the client. And so all that's available to me without any programming knowledge. So from here I can do a right click and say I want to go see the orders for that customer, and I can either drill into it once or I can just create a link, which means it's going to stay active and in the background. And there's an issue with the orders query. Let's go to order items for that customer. Okay, so this displays all the items that customer has on order. And since I created a link, every time I click on another one, it makes that available and obvious in the other view. And I can keep doing that. So if I find an item that I want to look at and I want to go into inventory for that item, I can pull up that as well. And see the inventory records for that item that I currently have highlighted down here. There's a little bit of a lag, but it's going there. I can also take these views that I have linked together and save them as Workspace, which is what all these are down at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So I can go in here and call this whatever workspace I want as an end user. Be helpful if I could type. And so that becomes available just for myself to use in the future. Now the next time I want to load up one of these, these 3 views, I don't have to go through all those steps. I can just click on this workspace, and even if all the views are closed or I'm looking at other views, it'll simply restore that in the same position and size of for the windows as well. So my customization stored and all the linking stored as well. So I could also share this workspace with other coworkers. It's very easy to do that. All I have to do is click share, and that's it. This little icon says it is shared, and if people have access to these 3 views as defined by the IT staff, then they'll be able to see that workspace. I can also go and publish it just as easy as that by clicking publish, and that goes out and actually makes it available on the web client. But before we go to the web client, I just want to show you real quick that we have a number of output options on each one of these views. I can create PDF style output, and now with the ability to have a full, what you see is what you get report editor. So you can go in and modify these fields and drag them around and make that final output look exactly how you want it to look. I can also just easily dump this into Excel, make delimited or XML content, and even hook it up to Crystal Report so that IEV becomes the driving engine behind your Crystal Report file. I can also schedule these outputs at any time just by clicking Add Schedule, telling it when I want to run and how often I want it to run, which I can have it run from anywhere from 1 hour to every other day to once every year, things like that. That's all I have to do as an end user and save that, and it'll be added to the report schedule output. And that can be automatically emailed to someone. So if your boss wants a monthly report based on the current, date minus 30 through today's date or something like that, it's very easy for end users to set that up and empowers them to create that report. All right, let's go over to the web client very quickly. The web client is based on HTML5 and CSS3 standards, so it works on all major web browsers, including, like I said, mobile devices. Since I published that workspace a minute ago, we should actually see it here. Order items and inventory. So because I have access to it, I can actually see that in the web as well. So give it a second here to pop that up. The web client also tells me who I'm logged in as and what workspace that I'm currently looking at. And again, my system's running a bit slow today. So here are those inquiries that I made a minute ago. And by using the icons at the top of the view, I can query that data. Still have the linking in place and the color rules and so forth. And I can also do things such as, remove the columns, sort by different columns, kind of the same things that you can do in the full client. So there's a lot of power and capability here. I can also resize these views and do different things with it like that. And again, it's going pretty slow here this morning for some reason, but it's my demo environment. Okay, so there's the order items that are finally coming up. And we should be able to see inventory levels pop up after that. All right. But as an end user, I can also go through and move these different views around wherever I want. And again, this doesn't have to be somebody that has access to the views within your four walls. It can be, customers and that sort of thing that want to use this as a portal. And they can actually go up here and save this workspace layout for their user login. They can also, if they have access, be able to choose whatever pre-built theme they want to make this look however they want it to look like, and we just have some in here by default. But you can also make your own to match your company colors and also restrict access to that functionality. They also have the ability to share this view, which in other words, gives them a little bit of HTML code to be able to put it on the main site and be able to embed this view directly in your main website or into SharePoint. I also have the ability to look at the same parameters that I had in the full client. So there's just a lot of capability that's available on the web as well. And I can do things such as create Excel output. I can, do a lot of other things like that, do in grid filtering and that sort of thing as well. And all the different types of pages and graphs and so forth are available to me in the web client as well. I'll just go up and pull up another workspace that I know has a couple of graphs in it real quickly. So here I'm looking at some error aging data and inventory due dates and that kind of thing, invoices and payments and so forth. Okay, well that's a very quick whirlwind tour of IEV.